The president yesterday that from the very beginning of our country, Islam has been woven into the fabric of our nation. The founders were, of course, huge.
Oh, my gosh, all of them were.
For 52 of the 56 signers.
19 of them were Muslim clerics.
Yeah.
And 52 were full-on Muslim. Yeah.
David Barton here is here to fill us with his, no, they weren't all Muslim lies. Welcome to the program, David.
Hey, guys. I got to stop laughing. We're going to talk. This is great.
When you heard the president say yesterday that from the very foundation of our nation, Islam has been critical and integral to our founding and our nation, what were your thoughts?
I just expressed them. I laughed. It was really pretty ridiculous. I have since then actually tried, because in all the reading I've done, thousands of books, there's nothing there. You and I know some of the stuff that's out there. I mean, we know that Muslims were the folks who captured the slaves to send to America, largely out of Africa. The Dutch would haul anything that they were given. They were traders. But Muslims were the one who did the slave hunting, slave trading, and et cetera. So the first Muslims came to America as a result of Muslims capturing them and sending them Dutch traders. And then we know beyond that we had a 32-year war with Muslims, and you own that first American edition of the Quran, and it's, the editors say, guys, you got to read this. This is crazy stuff. You'll understand why we've had 32 years of war with these nuts. I mean, those aren't exactly contributions that would jump to mind, but that's about all that you can really point to back then. So I actually spent a little time to look up. And if you go to a website called Islam101.com and look at the contributions of Islam to America, I'm telling you, bro, we're really sparse here. 1732, here's a contribution of Muslim to America. 1732, a Muslim is set free by James Oglethorpe, who is the founder of Georgia, and he's set free and given passage to England. And that's what they consider a contribution to America. Then if you get to 1790, it says, well, Muslims are known to be living in Florida. Well, yeah, that's a Spanish possession of Florida, and Moors, Muslims, occupied Spain, so no surprise there. Then 1807, it says a Muslim is set free and he buys shares in a bank. So now we have someone who has actually bought stock in America.
So now you're talking. This is really woven into the fabric.
When was the stock purchase?
1807.
1807. Okay.
Yeah, I've got two more for you. The second one I love, but here's another one. In 1828, the governor of South Carolina, or soon-to-be governor, John Owen, actually visited a Muslim in jail and took him to his plantation. So that's another contribution of Muslims to America, taken out of jail by the governor. But here's the one I love. All right, this is kind of fun. In 1856, the American military is engaged in all sorts of Indian wars in Western lands. And so they're trying innovative new things. And the Secretary of War at that time was Jefferson Davis, that 5 years later he will become part of the secession and the president of the Confederacy. But at that time, he's Secretary of War, and what they did was they hired a Muslim to raise camels in Arizona because the cavalry said, instead of using horses across the desert, let's try these camels. And so across the southern part of the country, across Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, the cavalry actually used camels at that point in time, and so they hired a Muslim to raise the camels, and that's a contribution of Muslims to America.
It's the fabric. It's practically the whole blanket.
Yeah. Well, so we were confused because the story of Jefferson's Quran, Salon.com says he had that 16 years before he wrote the Declaration of Independence.
And we had always heard, David, that he had asked, who are these Muslims? What do they want? And that's when somebody said, you have to read the Quran. And he said, can you get me a copy? And he sent over to England for a copy. Which is true?
Well, some of both. I mean, he was particularly interested in it once he had the Sun Tzu thing of know your enemy. I mean, who are these guys? Because he's one of the first three American diplomats to have to negotiate with Muslim terrorists. So he was really interested at that point. But like most other people in that day, they read from an apologetic standpoint, you want to know what other people believe so you know how to argue your own case. So it was not unusual at all to be familiar with the writings of Muslims, to be familiar with the writings of Hindus or others. They studied other religions. If you want to say it, they had comparative religions, and that helped them better know what they believed about their own faith and how to talk to those of other faiths. So that's not at all incompatible with Jefferson or that day. Now, the real interest came when he had to start negotiating with them, and now I've got to take this stuff a lot more seriously. It was an academic inquiry before, but now this is a policy matter. So it's really some of both that goes with it. It's a 1746 copy of the Quran that he got from London. And, so that's much earlier than he was into the conflict. But at the same time, it was one of those apologetic things that you learned in academics back then. It was just part of what they did.
And he was just very far ahead in looking in all religions. I mean, if the Dalai Lama would have been around at the time, he would have had dinner with the Dalai Lama, and he wouldn't have brought him in behind the house with the dumpster.
But it was not that Jefferson was unusual in that. That was a very much academic practice then. Academics looked at other religions, other faiths, other countries, other beliefs, and, they talked about that even in the Constitutional Convention. We've looked at every other republic that's out there to see how their government works, so we'll know what works and what doesn't. So you have these guys writing about Muslims early on because they want to know what people believe and what does it do to their culture, what does it do to their practice, their behavior, et cetera. So Jefferson's just one of many guys. He's not unusual in that he looked at other religions. That was a standard academic practice for most of the founders.
David, did you say he obtained his copy of the Quran in 1746? Because he was
no.
He would have been 3 years old.
Yeah, no, the Quran he obtained is a 1746 edition of the Quran.
Okay, 1746 edition. Do you know when he came by it? When did he?
Gracious.
It's a lot of articles says 11 years before he wrote the Declaration.
11 years.
11 years.
And I think that's right because at that point in time, that's when tensions with Great Britain are starting. But at that point in time, he's more of a student too. Remember, from his age at that point, he was more into his academic inquiries. In 1765, he had just become a member of the Virginia legislature, so he's a brand new legislator. And Virginia is where you have a lot of Muslim slaves in the state. And so that's, where slavery is first introduced, or reputed to be first.
And these are the slaves, just like we have ISIS enslaving Muslims now. These are the slaves that they said at the time were not Muslim enough.
Well,
right?
overseas. Yeah,
overseas. The Muslims, the ISIS of their day would have scooped these guys up and sold them to the slave traders because the Quran calls for that and says as long as they're not Muslim enough.
That's right. They're apostate Muslims, and so you can ship them off in slavery. Exactly. No.
So these would have actually been. And so what's amazing is the Muslims that would have been here would have been the Muslims that would have wanted to be the reformers.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm. They would have been the ones that we would have liked.
And you look at that point in time, Muslims took 1.25 million slaves in that point in time. So in that founding era, we look at what the founding fathers, you're talking about in that 3 decades or so, 1.25 million slaves that were captured by Muslims. This is a big part of what they believe their faith was.
All right. So then the president is right then. They did. They were important to the fabric of early America. They were the actual slave traders that sold the blacks into slavery to the Dutch trading companies.
Amazing.
There you go.
Good gosh.
That and their terrorism, the jihadism against Americans overseas, those are the 2 biggest contributions. But, I've got to
That's
give credit
amazing.
For the guy who raised camels. I've got to give him credit. That's got to be tough raising camels in the Arizona desert.
No, yeah.
And apparently they stopped using the camels because the rest of the cavalry laughed at them, right?
Well,
guys,
where did they get the camels?
If you ever want to have
Camels
fun, watch the movie Humps, Hawmps. It was Slim Pickens. It was done back on that thing with Jeff Davis, and they got the word humps because the cavalry looked at it and says, "Those are just horses with humps. What are those?" And so that's what they used for several years, and the Indians laughed at them when they tried to chase them down on camels. So
the military wouldn't ride them anymore.
Yeah.
No, exactly. It was a short-lived experiment. I got to credit their technology. If you're going to be in the desert chasing folks, why not use an animal that'll go for several days rather than several hours? But they were just so slow they couldn't keep up with the Indians.
David, thank you very much for enlightening on this. I think this is the headline.
Yeah.
President Obama is correct. Muslims provided most of the slaves for America.
Yeah.
Wow.
Is that accurate, David? Is that accurate?
I can't say that it's accurate, but I can say they supplied more than any other entity. But there were slaves. The Portuguese traders, the Spanish traders, there were a bunch of traders that went there, but Africa, the Muslims were the chief ones in Africa that were able to sell slaves to those who wanted to sell slaves.
Okay, so it would be accurate to say most African slaves, or most slaves from Africa.
A plurality of slaves, I suppose, is what he's saying there.
Had been obtained by Muslim enslavers. And whether they sold them to the Spanish or the Portuguese or the Dutch or whoever else, the greatest supplier of slaves would undoubtedly have been Muslims.
Unbelievable. Thank you very much, David.
You bet, guys.
That's a story. That Blaze has to write that story.
That's an amazing.
That's a great story.
And I assume that the president is talking about this argument from Salon. It's a book called the Thomas Jefferson's Quran, Islam and the Founders. But listen to, I mean, even in this argument on Salon, a left-wing website, says this, talking about how the president or how the founders at the time were talking about Muslims being tolerated and given rights like other religions. Of
course, every religion was.
They did so, however, not for the sake of actual Muslims, because none were known at the time to live in America. Instead, Jefferson and others defended Muslim rights for the sake of, quote, imagined Muslims, end quote, the promotion of whose theoretical citizenship would prove the true universality of American rights. Indeed, the defense of imagined Muslims would also create political room to consider the rights of other despised minorities whose numbers in America, though small, were quite real, namely Jews and Catholics.
I won't hear of it because...
Here in America, Islam has been woven into the fabric of our country since its founding.
Its founding!
Yes.
Since its founding.
Yes.
Okay.
Muslims, like ISIS, sent the slaves over from Africa.
Yeah,
so yes, he's exactly right. And if the president wants to extol those who were selling people into slavery then and are selling people into slavery now, so be it. So be it.